Hi guys, so this is my video on assimilation. Just for as a little bit of my background, I am a fourth generation American citizen. My great grandparents are all immigrants from Ireland. We're all immigrants from Ireland and Italy. And they really I think they started to consider themselves Americans as soon as they got off the boat at Ellis Island because they just kind of like they were mostly they came over to escape bad conditions in Ireland and Italy. Like one out of the 8 I know definitely came over to escape political persecution related to the political problems in Ireland, like with the war for independence against Britain. So I think they were all very happy and relieved to be here. One of my great-grandmothers actually refused to ever step foot in Ireland ever again because she didn't like it there because she had a really hard life before. She basically like earned money for her family when she was as a little girl by knitting socks and selling them to the British soldiers, who her parents and everyone else were like raising her not to trust or like. But she made friends with one of them, and he would actually go and so her parents would beat her if she didn't sell all the socks by the end of the day. But she made friends with one of the soldiers, felt bad for her, and would buy all the socks at the end of the day. So those were not good times for her in Ireland. But before I get too sidetracked, my great-grandparents were all very happy to be Americans. They all became American citizens, and they were very happy. They all came into the U.S. through Ellis Island, as I said before. And I consider myself just as much a child of immigrants as anyone else, like because my family didn't come from here originally. And I think that's like a lot of people in the United States. I also don't mean to portray it as roses and rainbows. It really wasn't all. It was not all just like sunshine and good times after my great-grandparents got here. They and my grandparents and my parents but especially early on, had to work really, really hard. And my great-grandparents and grandparents didn't have a lot, but they kind of like worked really hard and worked their way up, which is, I think, the experience of a lot of immigrants. So I think in a more general sense, a lot of like immigrant families kind of like the assimilation happens gradually over multiple generations. And I think in my just from what I've seen, it seems like the further you get from the first generation, the easier it is to marry outside of your ethnic group. So it seems in my own family, one of my cousins she just got engaged to her boyfriend, who he and his family are Indian, and they're Indian American. He's a second generation American. So they and I think what's really cool about it is that his family is like accepts her, and then like her family accepts him and his family, so it's really cool. So I think there are a lot of examples, not just in my own extended family, but also in just like my circle of friends and family friends. We know a couple where one person is Haitian and the other is Taiwanese, and it doesn't seem to really like be an issue for them, which is really cool. And then there's also, another couple where one is Peruvian and the other is Chinese. But what's interesting is that their daughters, who I'm friends with, seem to identify more as Asian than as Chinese or Peruvian. So I think that's an example of the how they talked about in one of the readings, the one about worlds of the second generation, when it talked about how immigrants from different groups tend to assimilate not just into being American, into the broader category, but into the subcategories like Asian or Black or I'm trying to think what else, Hispanic. So I think you become an American as you just sort of like get used to where you are, and I think that happens gradually throughout most immigrant families. Although I've seen that there's a big change, like even just amongst friends that I have, where they're second generation Americans, and I think sometimes their parents are a little bit surprised by like how like quote unquote American they are, which is funny because it's just this being American is just this concept that I think is really fluid, and that's one of the beautiful things about it, that it's just, it is whatever we make it. And I think it's a product of all of the groups that are here and how they blend together. So my mom said she had, so a good example of this, my mom said that she had one of her colleagues years ago, so he and his wife immigrated here from India, and the reason that they came here was that they belonged to two different castes, so it wasn't like their families looked down on them, and it wasn't really okay, it wasn't seen as okay for them to be together, so that was why they came here. And then I remember my mom saying that once her friend, he saw, so he wanted his son to be like Indian, like not to sort of like become like American, but then fully, but then he wanted him to still have the culture. And one day he saw his son, he was driving past the basketball court, and he saw his son playing with his friends who were of other ethnicities. And he said that his son was, so at home his son spoke like really properly and acted the way that his father wanted him to act. And then when he saw him on the playground, like not on the playground, on the basketball court with his friends, he was just talking like a Brooklyn teenager, and his dad was really upset. And he said that he told his wife that he wanted to go back to India, but they didn't, because it was out of the question, because they were just not accepted where they were. I think ultimately the experience of assimilating is different for every, not just every group, but for every individual. And that's what I think, that's what the nice and freeing thing about it is. It's that it doesn't have to be, it's like you don't have to become part of one group. You become part of America, which is just all different groups. And I think it's crazy when people say, like even just in the second reading in Worlds of the Second Generation, there were a lot of instances where the reading referred to white people as native whites, which I thought was really strange, because actually all white people in the United States are immigrants. It's like only if you're Native American have you like been here, has your family been here the whole time. So I think it's kind of crazy that people draw these just arbitrary distinctions and try to like pit themselves and other groups against each other, like that there's this whole us and them mentality that sometimes people fall into, where it's like, well, like we've been here, but it's like, have you though? Yeah, so I think, so long story short, I think that it's beautiful how America, and especially New York City, is accepting. And even though it's not perfect, like obviously there's still discrimination that takes place, and a lot of like there's some like friction between groups, but I think ultimately it's just like the process leads to a beautiful result, which is a society that's really much more open and accepting than anything we've seen in history, or that's the dream. And I think, well, it's not perfect, we'll get there.